All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning, Elichti Chanukah, Schos Baruch Hashem. Let's continue in Sanhedrin together, beginning by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for Tafshin Pehei, the Tilsim Mishpach of Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all of the Shirim and Drashos this year as a schus for Besoros Tavos for all of Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Josh and Becker Film commemoration of the yard site of Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda ben Rav Chaim Rafael, Semei Malka Esther in memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib ben Aaron HaKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, Hinda Bas Henech Ephraim, and Naftali Yona Shemikom Dama Ben Beatrice Miriam and Daniel Yigal. Our week of learning sponsors, Bruce Levin and the Merit, in memory of Avital Kala Bas Tova Batya, and Paul and Kathy Pollack, in memory of Paul's aunt, Esther Bas Zecharia. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the family Zayn Nechama, all of those who need a refuah shav and tchila, kol cholei Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shirem Yeretz Hashem, bring home our hostages b'shalom and b'karov, and allow our holy soldiers to be successful b'chol maaseh yedeihim. Also with that, let us begin. A lot to do today. Today's daf is Yud Gimel 13. We are picking up on, we are picking up Yeretz Hashem on Yud Beis Amud Beis. I'm sorry. On your base and base, and we are picking up. I believe we left off 3 lines into the wide lines. Is that correct? Rabbi Shimon, good. Rabbi Shimon Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon Mishum Shesei Tzar Lasos Pesach Sheni. So remember again, yesterday we were dealing with the interesting episode of Zechariah, and we were talking about the sugya about whether or not one is permitted to go ahead and cause a leap year because of Tumah. In other words, Klal Yisrael is Tameh. You want to be able to offer up Karban Pesach in a state of ritual purity. Is there the right, the halachic right, or maybe even the mandate to declare a leap year in order to go ahead and ensure that Klal Yisrael offers up the Karban Pesach in a state of Tumah? Machlokes, but interestingly enough, one of the rayas that was brought was Zechariah. Chizkiyo, Melech Yehuda did this and apparently then asked forgiveness for having done this. So we saw 2 possibilities. Either the mistake that he made is that he created a leap year for the sake of Tumah, or the other possibility that the Gemara advanced at the end of the shir was that he went ahead and he did this. Actually 3 possibilities. Second possibility was he was Ma'aber Chodesh Nisan, he made a second Nisan. Or third possibility was no, he declared the leap year when? On the 30th day of Adar. So he ended up making an Adar Beis, a second Adar, but he did it on the 30th day of Adar. What's the issue with the 30th day of Adar? 30th day of Adar technically could be the first day of Nisan, and you can only make a leap year in Adar, not in Nisan. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to unwrap this a little bit more. So the Gemara says, so what was Chizkiyahu's logic? So what was it? So in other words, it could be the Gemara is trying to just understand some of the mitzias, some of the realities that were existing in his time. So it could very well be that we're dealing with the situation of when you looked at the Jewish male population, half were tamei and half were tahar. V'nashim mashlimos letahorim va'od fos aleim. And what happened when you then added the women into the tally? So the women tilted the scales in the favor of Tara. In other words, when adding in the women, we'll see what's going on over here. When you added in the women, it turned out that the majority of Klal Yisrael was Tahar. Now it's important. Let's see. So Me'ikara Savar in the beginning. So Chizkiyahu thought, Nashim Berishon Chova, so Chizkiyahu's logic was like this: women are obligated in Karban Pesach. So because women are obligated on Karban Pesach, therefore, when you count women, so to speak, as part of the population for Tara and Tumah purposes. So therefore, because women are chayiv, therefore again, when you add them into the mix, it turns out that the majority, mi'utan tmein, so the majority were tahar, only a minority of Klal Yisrael was tamei. Now what happens when the minority is tamei? So what happens when the majority is tahar, the minority is tamei? So what do? Majority does Karban Pesach when? First Pesach. Minority does Karban Pesach, Pesach Sheni. Olabasov Savar, but in the end, he changed his mind and he said, Nashim Berishon Rishos. Perhaps women by the first Karban Pesach are not obligated, but rather again, it's only optional. If that's the case, so say, depending on the nature of their obligation, will determine whether or not they are part of the population count for Tumah and Tara purposes. If women are obligated in Karban Pesach, then they're going to be part of the population count to determine is the majority Tameh or is the majority Tahar. Why does that make a difference? Because if the majority is Tameh, everyone does Pesach on Pesach Rishon. Because as we saw before, whether in yesterday's daf, whether you hold Tumah Hutra B'tzibor or Dechuya B'tzibor, right? Whether you hold that, again, if the majority of the population is Tameh, that the laws of Tumah are either dispensed with or just set aside. Either way, if the majority of the nation is Tameh, everyone is doing Karban Pesach on the first Pesach. So again, if women are obligated in Karban Pesach, so that when you add them into the population count, the majority was Tahar. If the majority was Tahar, then those who are Tahar do it on Pesach Rishon. Everyone else does it on Pesach Sheni. But then Chizkiyahu thought maybe not. Maybe women are not obligated on Karban Pesach. If they're not obligated on Karban Pesach, then what? They're not part of the population tally for the purposes of Tumah and Tara. If that's the case, it turned out that the majority of Klal Yisrael was Tameh. If the majority of Klal Yisrael is Tameh, then what? Then everyone does Karban Pesach when? Pesach Rishon. Pesach Rishon. Okay. So the Gemara says, fine. So the point over here is just, there's a lot of machlokes concerning what exactly Chizkiyahu did in that year. One thing is clear, that what did he do? He created a leap year for Tumah purposes. That's what's clear. What exactly he did wrong in that process that he felt that he needed to ask forgiveness, so that is the subject of some controversy. Okay, Gemara goes weiter. Gufa, Amar Shmuel, Ema Arvenes Hashana B'Yom Shloshim Shel Adar, Hol V'Roi L'Kavah B'Nisan, Nisan Ibura. So the Gemara says, Lekov O Nisan. So we saw this in yesterday's daf, what we just said before. That halacha l'maisa, you cannot declare a leap year on the 30th day of Adar. Why not? Because since technically speaking, the 30th day of Adar could be what? Could be first day of Nisan. Therefore, again, it doesn't work. Ibru Amai. What if you did it? Ibru Amai. Amar Ula in Mekachnes HaChodesh. So Ula said, in that case, we would just not make a formal declaration of the new month. I Kidshu Mai. What if you did it? Amar Rava Batal Ibar. No, the Ibar doesn't work. Rav Nachman Aram Uber Umakodesh. Rav Nachman says it does work, although it's not ideal. But if you did it, it absolutely works. Amalei Rav Nachman Michti. Let's analyze this. Miporya lepischa. Tlasin Yomin Havu. So remember again, there are 30 days from Purim to Pesach. Or Miporya Dashina Bilchos Pesach. And Halacha, I say again, remember there's a concept of Shloshim Yom Kodem Achag. Sholin V'Darsha Binyan V'Shachag. 30 days before a particular Yom we begin the halachos, we begin learning the halachos of that Yom So therefore, again, Purim is 30 days before Pesach. So 30 days before Pesach. So therefore, on Purim, we already start to learn Hilchos Pesach. Disanya, Sholin B'Hilchos Pesach, Kodem Pesach, Shloshim Yom. We begin to learn the halachos of Pesach before Purim, or before Pesach, 30 days. Rabbi Shmuel says, Shtei Shavos. Rabbi Shmuel says, no, you don't need 30 days. Rather, you only need 2 weeks. V'chi. Mati Reish Yarcha, Marchikelei. Now, if when Rosh Chodesh comes, you're going to go ahead and end up distancing it. There's a concern that what could happen? What could happen is people are going to go ahead and not be fully mindful of the halachos of chametz. Rabbi says no. People know that in general, when Chazal have to make a leap year, so it's dependent on a whole bunch of cheshbonos, and therefore the Gemara says, Amri. And people will say the rabbis were not able to make that final decision until really the end of Adar. So therefore, the people won't take it as a lack of seriousness about the calendar. Rather, people will understand that the nature of these calculations is that they take some time. Okay, Amar Yehuda. Amar Shmuel. So I'll say, so now we're going to get into some of the technicalities regarding the calendar. So we'll go through them. So the Gemara says as follows. So Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, we do not go ahead and make a leap year. And I will say, okay, let me clarify this a little bit. Up until now, we've been focusing on that what drives the need for a leap year is that halacha l'maaseh we need Pesach to fall out in the spring. We're going to see that there's another thing that drives the calendar, which is that Sukkot really has to fall out sometime. We're going to see either right after, right during the autumnal equinox. So therefore, again, if we see that Sukkot is going to fall out during the summer, that's another reason to declare a leap year. Okay, so that's what the Gemara is focusing on over here. So that's the lashon over here. So Rabbi Yehuda said in Shmuel, we do not declare a leap year unless, of course, ela imkin haisat kufa chasera ruba shel chodesh. Now what this literally means is, unless of course we see that summertime is going to extend into Tishrei. So if summertime is going to extend into Tishrei, we'll go ahead and we'll declare a leap year. Now, remember, whenever declaring a leap year, what are we declaring? Which month? It's always Adar. Right? In other words, Adar is your only leap month. But if we see already by the way the seasons are going, that ultimately summer is going to extend well into, we'll discuss what well into means, well into Tishrei, we'll go ahead and we'll declare a leap year. This way Sukkot falls out during the autumn. So the Gemara says as follows, Kamaruba, what does it mean that the summer is going to fall out well into Tishrei? How much into Tishrei does it have to fall out? So the Gemara says, Kamaruba shal chodesh, Shisha asam de Rabbi Yehuda. It says 16 days. 16 days, top of Yud Gimel. Rabbi Yossi says, Echad ve'esrim yom, 21 days. Ushneim mikra echad darshu. And they both paskin, or they both derived their respective shitos from the same pasuk. Chaga asif to kufas hashana. So this is very interesting. Chaga asif, which is Sukkis, must be to kufas hashana, during the season or during the equinox of the year. Take a look at Rashi. Chaga asif, zman ha'asif shebechag. Dahainu cholo shel chag sheyachal le'asof bo davar ha'avid. So this is interesting. So the Gemara is darshaning over here that Chag Asif Dafka refers, even though Chag Asif refers to Sukkot, right? Because Sukkot is the harvest holiday. It's time when, in an agrarian society, you're bringing in all of the produce of the field, right? Produce is harvested, let's say around Shavuos time. You leave it out in the field to dry out over the course of the summer, and then Sukkot is when the Sukkot time is when you're bringing it in to the storehouses before the rainy season. So the Gemara is darshaning over here a little bit interesting, that Chag HaAsif actually refers dafka to Chalamayid, right? Because Chalamayid is the time when you would be able to gather things in. You can't do malacha on Yantiv itself, but you could do certain malachas on Chalamayid. So look at Rashi again. Zman HaAsif shebechag dahainu cholo shamoid sheyachal la'asaf bo davar avid hishamer sheyehei b'tekufas shana hanichnesas v'lo b'soch tekufas tamuz shehi mishana sha'avra. Make sure that the Chag HaAsif Chalamayid is part of the next season, i.e. fall, autumn, and not part of the previous season of Tammuz, which is the summer. Okay? So let's go to the Gemara now. Back to the Gemara, they'll come at Rashi. Mar Savar Kulei Chag Ba'ina B'Tkufa Chadasha. So one opinion holds that the entire Yom Tov of Sukkot must be in the new season of autumn. Umar Savar Miktas Chag Ba'ina B'Tkufa Chadasha. And ultimately the other opinion says, no, you don't need the whole Yom Tov of Sukkot to be in the fall. Rather, again, you just need part of the Yom Tov of Sukkot to be in the fall. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Ma'ika Savri." So what do these two respective opinions hold? Ika Savri Yom Tkufa Gomer. If you hold that ultimately, again, the day of the equinox itself, right? The day of the equinox is the last day of the previous season. Belav hachinamilo. Either way, you're not going to satisfy the criteria. Lo leman damar kulei chag ika, v'lo leman damar mikzas chag ika. Then either way, ultimately, again, it's not going to satisfy either of the opinions. Neither the opinion that holds that the entire Yom Tov must be in the new season, or the opinion that holds that part of the Yom Tov must be in the new season. So the Gemara says, Ella kasavri yom tekufa maschil. Rather, what you have to say is both opinions hold that the day of the equinox itself is the beginning of the new season, not the part of the old season. Okay? So the Gemara says, Meisveri is a kasha, Yom Tekufa Gomer Div Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the day of the actual equinox is considered to be the end of the previous season. Rabbi Yossi says, Yom Tekufa Maschil. Rabbi Yossi says, no, not true. The day of the equinox is the beginning of the new season. V'otanya, furthermore we learned, Ein ma'avrin es hashana ela imkein haisa tekufa chasera. Ruba Shel Chodesh. As we said before, the only time we'll declare a new a leap year is when again, Abba says, as we said before, that the summer is going to extend into Tishrei in a significant way. Literally means, again, Tishrei is going to be chaser because of summer. How much of summer or how much of Tishrei does summer have to extend into in order to declare a leap year? So in words of V'kama Ruba Shel Chodesh, Shisha Sayom, 16 days. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Shtei Yodos B'Chodesh, 2/3 of Tishrei. V'kama Shtei Yodos B'Chodesh, how much is 2/3 of Tishrei? Chaf Yom, 20 days. 20 days. Rabbi Yossi says, Shisha Asra Lifnei Pesach. So again, interesting enough, Rabbi Yossi is now going back a little bit. Rabbi Yossi says, when will we declare a leap year? I should say, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Mechashvin Shisha Asra Lifnei Pesach Ma'avrin. If we see that winter is going to extend in a significant way into the month of Nisan, we'll also go ahead and make a leap year. I both say that's what we're much more familiar with, right? Because remember again, if we see that winter is extending into Pesach, into Nisan, then what's going to happen? Then Pesach is not going to be what? Chag HaAviv. Chag HaAviv. I will say, so again, just so you appreciate, what's being introduced over here is, interestingly enough, that halacha l'maisa now, the Gemara is introducing us to the idea that seasonal issues don't only affect Pesach, but also affect Sukkot. Sukkot needs to fall out after the autumnal equinox. The shaila just is over here, how much of Sukkot? Is it the entire Yom Tiv? Is it just from Chalamayid and on? But again, what we're being introduced to over here is that halacha l'maisa, if we see that essentially Sukkot is going to fall out during the summer, that would be another reason to declare a leap year. Okay, so now the Gemara is going back to Pesach. So Yossi says, if we see that winter is going to extend into Nisan, we go ahead and we declare a leap year. So the Gemara says, Shisha Asr Lifnei Achag in Ma'avrin. But if halacha l'maisa again, it's going to be 16 days before Yom Tov. We don't make a leap year because of that. Rabbi Shimon says, Af shisha asr lefnei achag ma'avrin. Even if it's going to turn out 16 days before the Yom Tov, we still go ahead and make a leap year. So the Gemara says, others say miuto. Only if it's a minority, v'kama miuto, or even if it's a minority. What is a miut of the month? Arba asayom, 14 days. To which the Gemara says, Kashya, you're right, that poses a contradiction to the previous aforementioned days. So both say, all of this is just an ongoing machlokes. Essentially, we know we need Pesach to be in the spring. We know we need Sukkot to be in the autumn. So then the shaila just is, if the previous season is encroaching upon the upcoming Yom Tiv, how much encroachment do we allow before we have to declare a leap year? That's these variety of opinions. Amar Mar, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shtei Yodos B'Chodesh Esrim Yom. Rabbi Yehuda holds 2/3 of the month, and 2/3 of the month is going to be 20 days. Rabbi Yossi says, Mechashvin Shisha Asar Yom Lefnei Mechashvin. We calculate the following: Shisha Asar Yom Lefnei Pesach Ma'abrin. If it's 16 days before Pesach, then we will declare a leap year. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda. So isn't that the same position as Rabbi Yehuda? Yom Tekufa Gomer Yom Tekufa Maschil Ikabinahu. So I'll say, so no, the point of contention will be what we do with the actual equinox day. Okay, does the equinox day go ahead and complete the following season, or is it considered to be the beginning of the new season? Amar Mar, Shisha Asr Lefnei Achag in Ma'avrin, 16 days before the Yom Tov of Sukkot, we don't have to declare a leap year. El Rabbi Yossi, Shisha Asr Lefnei Achag Hudlo, Hashivsar, V'Timnisar Ma'avrin. So 16 days, no, but 17 and 18 days we will. Well, that's the question. V'Hamar Shisha Asr Lefnei Pesach in B'Tzir Lo. But we learned 16, yes, less than that, no. To which the Gemara says, lo, edi ma'avrin. We wouldn't declare a leap year in any of these situations. Va'aydi de tana reisha shisha salafnei pesach, tana nami shisha salafnei achag. Just mishnaic symmetry, or brisa symmetry. Since it said 16 days before Pesach, it used that same number ultimately again before Sukkot. As Rabbi Shimon says, Af shisha asar lifnei achag ma'avrin. Rabbi Shimon says even 16 days before Sukkot, ultimately again they'll declare the leap year. Hainu Tanakama. Isn't that the same position as the Tanakama? Amud Beis, Ika Benayu, Yom Tekufa Maschil. the Yom Tekufa Gomer. So ultimately, again, I will say, no, the fundamental machlokes, once again, will be on the equinox day. What's the status of the equinox day? Is it the end of the previous season or the beginning of the new one? V'lo Masaimi. And we're not sure who to attribute which opinion to. Achirim, or the Achirim say, mi'uto, only the minority. V'kama mi'uto, but say what is considered to be the minority of the month. Arba asar yom, 14 days. So Ma'ikasavi, what do they hold? Ikasar yom tkufa gomer v'kula chag ba'inan ha'ika. So I'll say if they hold, number one, that the equinox day itself is the completion of the previous season, and you need the entire Yom Tov of Sukkot to be in the autumn, then that makes sense. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Achirim bit Kufas Nisan kaimi. The Achirim are actually talking about again Kufas Nisan, not to Kufas Tammuz. They're talking about the spring, not the summer. T'chsev Shamar es Chodesh Ha'aviv, Shamar Aviv Shel Tekufa, Shehei b'Chodesh Nisan. Make sure that the spring season is in Chodesh Nisan, for the Abra Adar, and therefore again, do what you need to do to ensure that Nisan is the spring month. And how do you do that? How do you ensure that? Make Adar into a leap year. Make a second Adar. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Tana milamala lemata kahashiv. The Tana ultimately again is going from top to bottom. V'achi kamar ad miuto ma'avrin. Even if the new season is going to extend only a little bit into the next month, we go ahead and we make a leap year. V'kama miyuto, what's a miyut? Arba asar yom, 14 days. Ravina amar li olam achirim b'tishrei kaimi. Ravina says, no, the achirim are actually referring to Tishrei. They're not referring to Nisan. They're referring to an issue of where the summer is going to extend into Sukkot. V'kasavri achirim, Kulei Chag Ba'inan, the Yom Tov Rishon. So the Achirim hold, Rabbi, as we mentioned before in Amud Aleph, that Halacha L'maisa, all of Sukkot must be in the autumn, including Yom Tov Rishon. Yom Tov Rishon, Chag HaAsif Ksiv. But I say, how can you say Yom Tov Rishon? Rabbi say, why would you say the first day of Yom Tov of Sukkot needs to be in autumn, in fall? After all, again, what does the Torah say? Chag HaAsif. Remember what we saw before in Amud Aleph? Chag HaAsif is referring to what? Chalamayid, because it's referring to the part of Sukkot where you could do malacha, where you could gather things. When can you gather things? That's Chalamayid. And it seems that's the only part that needs to be in the autumn. To which the Gemara says, no, it refers to Chag Haba Bisman Asifa. It refers ultimately again to the Yom Tov that comes during the gathering. Which is the Yom Tov that comes during the gathering? Ultimately, again, that's all of Sukkot, even from Yom Tov Rishon. Okay. All right, Moses, I know we did it a little bit quickly, but again, the takeaway is that essentially two brand new pieces of information being introduced here. We thought up until this point, really the only thing that ever motivated a leap year was Pesach, right? That ultimately, again, I need Pesach to be Chag HaAviv, because the Torah explicitly says that Pesach needs to be the Chag HaAviv. And now halacha, and therefore again, if you see that winter is extending into Nisan, you go ahead and declare a leap year, and by the Adar Beis. Now, interestingly enough, a machlokes, how much of winter, or I should say, how much of Nisan has to be encroached by the previous season of winter in order to declare a leap year? Machlokes. New piece of information being introduced over here. Also, there's another piece. When the Torah refers to Sukkot, the Torah refers to Sukkot as Chag HaAsif Tekufas Hashana. So Yom Tov, right? Chag HaAsif, the Yom Tov of gathering, that's Sukkot. Tekufas Hashana has to be celebrated at the time of the new season. Oh, now Sukkot is also linked to a season. Which season is Sukkot linked to? Autumn, fall. Which means that now Sukkot has to be in autumn, which means that if you see that it's still summertime during Tishrei, you also have to declare a leap year. Now again, when are you declaring a leap year? Only in Adar, back in Adar. So we'll say, so now the shayla is, how much of summer has to encroach on Tishrei in order to declare a leap year? So again, machlokes. That's machlokes. Similarly, which part of Sukkot has to occur during autumn? Also machlokes. Is it the beginning of Sukkot? Is it just the middle chalamayit of Sukkot? Also machlokes. Other piece of information that just came to light is the day of the equinox itself. Is that considered to be the first day of the new season or the last day of the previous season? also machlokes. So Rabbi say, what's the takeaway? What's the takeaway? What's incredible is you see, we are so not used to these halachas because we have a set calendar, right? And this has all been figured out from us, by Hillel Hasheni with the Soda Ibra, the secret of intercalation. We saw it in Masechus Rosh Hashanah. So just an appreciation to the complexities of the calendar, an appreciation to how much thought had to go into establishing the calendar when this was done month by month. I would say, by the way, so what's the Musar Haskell for us? We see how much thought, how much forethought has to go into proper time management, right? The management of the calendar is the paradigmatic example of time management. And if you want to manage your time correctly, what do you see? It's not just about how you're using it now, but it's about forethought about how time is going to be used in the future. Time management requires incredible awareness and mindfulness in the present, but also requires future mindfulness for how and where you're going to use your time in the coming days, in the coming months as well. Incredible. All right, let's go weiter. We're taking a little bit of a sidestep away from that, from the calendar, and a little bit back to the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, Smichas Zikenim. So now we're back to the Mishnah. So remember again, back in the Mishnah talked about the concept of Smichas Zikenim. So Smichas Zikenim, the Mishnah said, has to be done by a Beis Din of, what did the Mishnah say? Smichas Zikenim v'arifas egla b'shlosha de Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'chamisha. So we'll say, so Smichas Zikenim. Now, again, we'll see already what exactly this means, but Bepashtos, let's just say, Bepashtos says the concept as follows. If the Sanhedrin delivers an erroneous ruling, and as a result of that ruling, the Jewish people make a mistake. So, right, but again, it's the Sanhedrin's fault. They issued an erroneous halachic ruling. Klal Yisrael follows their ruling, and it turns out they were wrong. There's a carbon called Par Helam Davar Min HaTzibur, a special carbon, a special sin offering that is brought on behalf of the Sanhedrin and on behalf of the people. So we're assuming over here that when we talk about smicha, the Sanhedrin has to do smicha on that carbon. That's what it sounds like we're talking about over here. That has to be done in the presence of a Beis Din. How big is that Beis Din? Machlokes. Rabbi Shimon says 3 people. Rabbi Yehuda says 5 people. So now let's analyze. So Tan Rabbanon, V'samchu ziknei, the pasuk says the elders of the court will go ahead. Right, the elders of the court will place their hands, will do smicha. And Rabbi say smicha literally means place. And by the way, smicha is a din in many different karbanos, but it literally means placing your hands on the head of the animal and literally again leaning on it, shifting your weight to the head of the animal. So the Gemara says as follows. So you might have thought that again any elders could do this. Get 3 old guys from the marketplace. 3 old guys to the marketplace, let them do smicha, and that would satisfy the criteria. Tamalomar Eida. Therefore, the pasuk says Eida. The pasuk said that Eida usually means Sanhedrin. Eida means Sanhedrin. Eida, Yachol Kitani Eida. So maybe it's Eida, any members of the Sanhedrin will do. You don't need elderly. Tamalomar Ha'Eida Miyuchadin Shebe Eida. Therefore, I will say the pasuk when it talks about smicha, leaning on the Par Helam Davar Min HaTzibur, right? Leaning on this special sin offering brought by the Sanhedrin for an erroneous ruling. Who has to lean on it? Ziknei Ha'eda, right? The lashon over here, the pasuk of Samchu Ziknei Ha'eda. So number 1, Zikanim, elders, and Ha'eda, that's like the definitive article, the Hei HaYediyah. That means it has to be the esteemed, the most chashiv members of the Sanhedrin. The Kamahain, how many people from the Sanhedrin do you need for this process? The Samchu Shnayim, Ziknei Shnayim. So Samchu, they will lean, plural, that's 2. Ziknei, plural elders, that's 2, so that's 4. Ve'in Beis Din shakel, and you can never have an even number Beis Din. Mosif alein od echad harikan chamisha de Rabbi Yehuda. So what's the position of Rabbi Yehuda? Samchu 2, Ziknei 2, that gives you 4. Can't have an even number Beis Din. Add on 1 more, that's 5. 5 members of the Sanhedrin do this smicha. Rabbi Shimon says no. Ziknei Shnayim. We just look at Ziknei. Ziknei is 2. Ve'in Beis Din shakel, you can't have an even number Beis Din. Mosifin alein od echad harikan shlosha. So again 3. So interesting enough, Rabbi Shimon only darshans Ziknei. Rabbi Shimon only darshans ziknei. He doesn't go ahead and he doesn't darshan v'samchu. So the Gemara says, "I've Rabbi Shimon haksiv v'samchu." Rabbi Shimon, what about v'samchu? We should give you another two. Chomi b'alei legufei. No. Rabbi Shimon says, no. You can't darshan that. That v'samchu teaches me a halacha. In other words, Rabbi Shimon's perspective is drasha is really only learned out from a word that potentially is extraneous, not necessary, written in an elongated form, but v'samchu teaches us the actual halacha of smicha. So therefore it's not used for a drasha. Rabbi Yehuda legufei lo tzarech. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't need it for a drasha. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't need to teach the halacha. Why? The imkain, Tzimmer said lo tzarech, the imkain de lo asi v'samchu l'drasha lichtov ziknei ha'ir yedehem al rosh hapar. So Rabbi Yehuda says like this. The pasuk could have eliminated v'samchu altogether. What could it have written? It could have just written the elders of the Eidah, their hands on the par. And I would have understood that. What does that mean? They lean on the par. Therefore, the word v'samchu, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is extra. Because it's extra, we darshan it to teach us another two dayanim. But Rabbi Shimon, iksiv hachi hava amina my al b'samach. Rabbi Shimon would have said, if the pasuk would have said that without the word v'samchu, I would have thought, what does al mean? Al means that the elders place their hands next to the head of the animal, but they don't necessarily have to put their hands on the head of the animal. Therefore, again, you need v'samchu to teach us that no, the hands actually go on the head of the animal. Rabbi Yehuda, Gamar rosh me'ola. Rabbi Yehuda darshans, he makes a drasha or gzer shava of rosh from ola. Just like an ola requires actual smicha, hands on the head of the animal. So too, the parallel government atzibur also requires hands on the head of the animal. Rabbi Shimon lo gamar rosh me'ola. Rabbi Shimon ultimately again does not darshan rosh me'ola. Therefore, both say salach l'maisa fundamental machlokes over here between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda about how smicha is done. Now again, here's what everyone is agreeing with, which is when you bring this unique sin offering, this par helam davar min hatzibur, so it requires smicha from elders of the Sanhedrin. The machlokes is how many elders, right? So Rabbi Yehuda is saying 5, Rabbi Shimon is saying 3. Based on how they darshan the psukim. Okay, so the Gemara says, one second, let's analyze this a bit more. Tana, smicha usmichas zikenim begimel. Both smicha, as well as smicha by elders, has to be done by 3. So the Gemara says, my smicha or my smichas zikenim. So just to point out over here, the Braisa is actually utilizing 2 distinct terms, smicha and smichas zikenim. So the Gemara says, what's the distinction between smicha and smichas hasekenim? Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan, mismach sabi. So what says it's interesting. So the Gemara says, you're right. Smicha, ultimately again, or I should say, smichas zekenim is the concept that we just saw before about elders of the Sanhedrin leaning on the head of the par helam davar min hatzibur. Smicha is actually what we would call ordaining rabbis. Rashi says over here, mismach sabi, the ordination of elders, l'karye lahem rebbe, the ordination of someone to call them rebbe, right? To get literally what we call smicha. So the Gemara says, so Amalei Abaye the Rav Yosef, mismach sabi b'shlosha minalan. From where do we know that the ordination of rabbis, what we call smicha, which Rabbi Yosef represents the unbroken chain, from Moshe Rabbeinu to Yoshua, so on and so forth. Where do we know that has to take place with 3 people? So so say maybe it comes from Moshe and Yoshua. Right? The pasuk says that Vayismoch Yisyadav Alav, that Moshe Rabbeinu placed his hands on Yoshua. And by doing that, almost like he gives him this smicha, he ordains him, he puts him in the position of power. Well, if that's the case, again, Moshe Rabbeinu was 1. So maybe smicha could be done by 1. Maybe you'll say Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe was like a Sanhedrin. So maybe again, if that's the case, then maybe you need a Sanhedrin to convey smicha. Ihachi libay shivim b'chad. It should require 70, 71, right? A Sanhedrin. Kasha. All right, you're right, that's a good question. So first of all, again, it's interesting. One second, when you ordain someone, do you literally place your hands on that person? It's like rabbinical ordination, smicha, actually done by placing hands. Amrle samchina la b'shma. No. Rather, what we do is, again, I will say, we confer a title upon the person. Karile Rebbe. V'yarvele reshusa lemeidan dine knesses. No, rather, again, I will say, how does ordination occur? Now, again, interestingly enough, ordination is still going to have to occur by a group. By a group. How big the group has to be, we'll have to see, but there's definitely a group. But again, although it's called smicha, which means ultimately resting hands on someone, it doesn't actually require a placement of hands. Rather, what is the process of smicha? The process of smicha is a conference of title. We call the person Rebbe, and the person has the ability to go ahead, listen to this, V'yavle reshusa lemeidan dine knesses. And the person has the right to paskin in the halachos of knessos, the laws of financial penalties. You have to just understand, the laws of knessos are generally considered to be a more complex area of halacha. Why is that? It makes sense, because as opposed to dine mamanis, suppose say dine mamanis, follow logic. Right, follow logic. I go and I injure Ruvain. So there's a number of different buckets of compensatory damages out there. But those compensatory damages make sense. Lost wages, doctor bills, humiliation, all those things. Knaso will say, right? What are the halachos of knasos? The Torah says you pay X for this, X for that. In other words, it's not mammon, it's knas. So when someone has smicha, they've developed a proficiency to even paskin in halachos of knessos. V'chad lo samich. So the Gemara says, now 1 second, is that true? So the Gemara says, although we may not know how many people you actually need for the basin of smicha, one thing is clear, which is what? It's not one. It's not one. Because remember again, what did the Brisa say? The Brisa said, smicha sekina begimel. Right, smicha, and the smicha of elders has to be done by 3 people. So, but it's clear that halacha l'maisa, you can't do it with 1 people. You can't do it with 1 people. Now, by the way, if you take a look at Rashi for just a moment, Rashi says over l'meidan dine knesses. Why does it bring up, like we said before, the laws of the halachos of fines, of knessos, of penalty payments, the Elohim ksiv, the mashma daine mumchin, v'hainu smuchin. Because we'll say, when it comes to the laws of knessos, penalty payments, the Torah uses lashon of Elohim. You'll bring it to the Elohim, which means not only a judge, but a judge who is an expert. But in general, in other areas of monetary law, lav dafka, that you need an expert judge. Fine. So it's just an interesting idea. By monetary law, you need someone who's proficient, doesn't have to be an expert. By knossos, you need someone who's an expert. Smicha represents that someone has not only a knowledge but an expertise in halacha. Therefore, you can even paskin dine knossos. Okay, so we'll say, so now the Gemara says, but 1 second, is it true that halacha l'maisa, 1 person can't go ahead and convey smicha? We'll say this is a dramatic story. V'hamar of Shmuel Arviuda Amarav Baram Zachar Osa Ish Latov. This particular man is remembered for good. Who is this man? For Rabbi Huda ben Bava Shmo. Rabbi Huda ben Bava was it? And I both say an amazingly beautiful and overwhelming Gemara. Shil Malehu, for not Rabbi Huda ben Bava, Nishtachachu Dine Knasas Mi Yisrael. The laws of knessos, right? The laws of penalty payments would have been lost from Klal Yisrael. Nishtachachu, they would have been forgotten. Why? Nigrasinu. Why can't you just learn them? Why would they have been forgotten? Ella, both side top of your dalit, 14a. Ella, batlu dine knessos mi Yisrael. Rather, both say the laws of knessos would have been batal. Now, both say how so? So remember, as we just said before, in order for a beis din to adjudicate dine knessos, knas law, the dayanim have to have smicha. Smicha, right? Classic smicha, the classic process of ordination was, again, an unbroken chain that started with Moshe and went to Yoshua. The Gemara says, thanks to Rabbi Huda ben Bava, the chain of smicha remained intact. Were not Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, the chain of smicha would have been broken, and therefore, again, one of the manifestations of that would have been there would have been no way to pass in the Knas. So I'll say, what happened to Yehuda ben Bava? This is an incredible story that's at least started today. The Gemara says, Shepam achas gazra malchus harasha gzeira al Yisrael. One time, the evil monarchy, and I said this is a reference to Rome. to Rome, made a decree upon the Jewish people. Shekala somechi hareg. Shabbos say, whoever confers smicha will be executed. V'chala nismachi hareg. And whoever receives smicha will be executed. V'ir shesomchin ba techarev. And any city in which smicha is conferred will be obliterated. Utchumin shesomchin bahem ye'akru. And any cities within the tchum, within the boundaries of somewhere where smicha was confirmed, will be uprooted. So I'll say, so essentially, now what's happening over here? Why are the Romans so preoccupied with smicha? Because what does smicha represent? Smicha represents the transmission of our Masorah, the transmission of our tradition. What is Rome interested in doing? What are they interested in doing? They're interested in uprooting the Masorah, the tradition of Kal. So remember, I'm going to both say, like the Greeks of Hanukkah, the Romans were not interested in our physical annihilation, they were interested in our spiritual annihilation. So therefore they figured, disrupt the Masorah, disrupt smicha, and ultimately again you'll under the Jewish people say, you know what the incredible irony is? And this just shows you something absolutely amazing. We don't have smicha today. We don't have smicha, right? The chain of smicha, I mean, we have smicha. We ordain rabbis, but the smicha that we have today is not the real original smicha. It's more like a zecher, like a remembrance to what was. It's not the actual smicha. But you know what the incredible part is? Smicha has been disrupted, and yet what? We're still here. We're still here. In other words, even if somehow you throw some interference, you disrupt the Masorah of Klal Yisrael in certain ways, you can't stop us. Nothing stops us. Nothing interrupts us. Nothing interferes with the progression of Klal Yisrael. An absolutely overwhelming reality. In any event, the Romans are bent on going ahead and disrupting smicha. So what happened? What did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava do? What was his plan? Now again, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava himself had smicha, and he wanted to ensure that the chain would continue. So what did he do? Halach v'yashav lo bein shnei harim gidolim, ubein shnei ayaros gidolos, ubein shnei techumei Shabbos, bein usha l'shafram. So I'll say what Rabbi Yehuda, this is fascinating. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava does is essentially he sits between two cities. In other words, he goes in between two mountains. So what's going to happen? The Romans can't uproot mountains. Between two large cities, they can't uproot whole cities, between two Shabbos boundaries. So essentially what he does is he chooses a geographic location that doesn't put the surrounding population in danger. That's his chap. So Gemara says, V'samach sham chamisha zekenim. He ordained 5 elders. Who were they? Ve'eluhein, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua. Those are the 5 elders. For Rav Avia, Mosif af Rab Nechemya. Rav Avia said even Rab Nechemya was included in this as well. So what happened? This is incredible into the story. Kevan shikiru oivim bahem. Once the enemies of the Jewish people saw what was happening over here, Amar lahem. So in other words, it was then discovered what was going on, right? It was discovered ultimately again that the Romans were going to go ahead. The Romans discovered what was happening. They saw that Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was giving smicha. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says, Banai, Rotsu, run away. Amru lo, Rebbe, matehei alecha. Rebbe, if we run, what's going to happen to you? Amar lahen, harini muta lifnechem ke'even she'ein lahopchin. Don't worry, they won't get through me. They won't get through me. I'll go ahead and protect you. You run, they won't get through me. So Amrulo, lo zazu misham atshina atsubo shalosh meos lonvios shal barzel vasua kikavra. So say what happened? Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava stood his ground, and he was pierced literally again with 300 spears. His body was pierced so many times that he became like a sieve. He was pierced so terribly. But he held his ground. He held the Romans back and allowed these newly ordained Rabbanim to go ahead and escape. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, so we'll say, okay, you know what, there's more to the story. We'll stop over here for today, Rabbi, but just understand what an incredibly overwhelming and profound story. So Rabbi say, so first off, this is how the chain of smicha was maintained through Rabbi Yehuda. Now, more about Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava tomorrow, Rabbi say, but just understand the amazing part over here. Jewish history is filled with stories like this. Jewish history is filled with stories of people, of individuals who are moser nefesh, who engaged in profound self-sacrifice for the good and for the continuity of the Am. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava stood in the face of the approaching Roman army, knowing full well that he was done. Literally, again, killed with 300 spears. Why? To maintain the continuity of Smicha, to maintain the continuity of Klal Yisrael. These are the shoulders upon which we stand. These are the people to whom we owe what we have today. Individuals throughout this year. Rabbi Huda Membava, we know his name, but there are tens of thousands of others whose names we do not know, but who made this same sacrifice for our people, and in whose merit, in whose zuchus, we are zocha to be here today. Rabbi Huda Membava's neshama, and the neshamas of all of those who have been most nefesh HaKlal Yisrael, should have a tremendous aliyah, should have a lichtig Gan Eden, and we should be zocha mi'aretz Hashem to make their sacrifice worth it. Let's go stop over here for today. Shkayach, everyone. Amen. All right, everyone. We sacrifice for smicha, but we don't have it now.